Chapter 21. On the north side of town, the leaves had begun to fall in earnest. Shades of brown and orange blanketed entire streets. It was easy to spot which residents had missed their last few chances to mow the lawn before the cool winds arrived. Those yards stood apart, dotted with stubborn grass stalks poking through the fallen leaves. Flower beds, once neat along the fronts of houses, were slowly being buried. Even the larger hedges and bushes, favored over flowers by some, were beginning to disappear beneath the foliage. The neighborhood had a certain charm in its own way. A quiet kind of nostalgia clung to it, but there was something undeniably shabby about the place too. Many of the homes were weather-worn and stained. Sidewalks bulged where tree roots had pushed through. The streetlights glowed with a dim, antique yellow. Driveways were cluttered with debris and old cars, relics from decades past. Each one belonged to a man who swore he'd cash in on it someday, if the right buyer ever came along. Sides had once been assigned to this ward, briefly. He remembered how it made him second-guess his choice of profession. Many here didn't work. They lived on government subsidies and hustled whatever they could on the side. The idea of family didn't quite fit. Clan was more accurate. Blood ties stretched across blocks, not just households. They handled disputes in a tribal fashion. The elders of each home would meet, weigh in, and settle things internally. Whenever Sides arrested someone, their relatives would always show up at the station, not to post bail, but to keep them company. They had more time than money. Still, there was something quietly tragic about this neighborhood. Most of its residents descended from families displaced by the Great Depression's brutal toll on agriculture. Family farms, whether owned or worked as tenant labor, had been uprooted, and entire generations cast adrift. They came from every direction. Whole clans rooted in the same home counties for generations packed up and moved to town in search of work. For a time, especially that first generation, there was a sense of purpose and modest success. It was the foundational myth of post-World War II America. But whatever progress they made began to unravel when their children came of age. The manufacturing jobs were gone. Some found work in the service industry when they could find it. Offshoring, neoliberal doctrine, and the distant policies of East Coast intellectuals quietly gutted what little structure remained. Drugs and alcohol filled the void, and the grandchildren were left to survive on their own. It wasn't a brave new world. It was a graveyard, a monument to a promise that never arrived. Sides remembered the kinds of suspects this neighborhood produced. They'd fight the police over anything, no matter how minor or clear-cut. Sometimes it escalated to violence. The excuses they gave were often absurd, laughable even, but the one thing you could never do was laugh. No matter how unbelievable the story, they didn't tolerate being mocked. As the houses slid past, Sides found himself wondering why the Silvas had chosen this neighborhood to house their son. This was no place for someone struggling with addiction. It was like tossing a hen into a den of foxes. They had the means to put him anywhere. Maybe they were simply naive about life on the north side. Or maybe it was convenience. They could hop on the interstate and be at his door within a mile, without weaving through the maze of neighborhoods. Who knew what their true reasoning was? At least, this corner of the north side was relatively safe, given the broader context. Still, Sides wondered if a code of silence, the neighborhood's unwritten honor culture, was at play. That might explain a few things. Eckhart paid no attention to anything in particular as he drove. He didn't care for the people, nor did he see any reason to. They'd never be his clients, and most were known for trouble. He simply steered the SUV straight, right, or left, depending on what was called for. As they reached the final street before the critical turn, Eckhart shut off the radio and flicked on his blinker. He made the right turn cleanly and pulled up alongside the sidewalk in front of a house on the northern end of the block. Killing the engine, the two men sat in silence, watching a familiar figure move slowly across Alfonso's yard. It was Detective Al Weber. He wore an archaic digital camera around his neck and moved stiffly, mechanically, from side to side, occasionally raising it to take a shot. He seemed completely unaware of their presence. They watched as he shifted around the yard, trying out different angles. There was no flash, but it was obvious he was taking multiple shots from the same positions, for reasons neither man could discern. Once satisfied, Weber began reviewing the images on the camera's comically small screen. When he lowered it, the device dropped onto his enormous gut, then slid to one side, suspended by its strap. Next, he pulled out a cigar and lit it. A thick cloud of gray smoke poured from his mouth, which hung slightly open. He shuffled to the chain-link fence and peered around the side of the house. For a moment, it looked like he might try to climb over. He even grabbed the top rail and shifted his weight forward. But then, with a grunt, he rocked back and let go. Turning away, he made his way back to his sedan, trailing puffs of smoke like a triumphant steam engine. There was a stretch of about 10 minutes where the two men sat in silence, watching from their front seats as Weber sat in his own, making a series of phone calls. He'd rolled the window down, holding a cigar outside to let the smoke drift into the cool air. When the calls ended, he glanced at the SUV, but immediately looked away. Eckhart scoffed when Weber pulled out a voice recorder and began speaking into it. It was the kind usually favored by serious journalists, portable, durable, built for crisp audio. Most detectives just used their phones, relying on the subject's awareness of being recorded. But Weber was in a class of his own. He clearly valued quality audio, even if it was only his own voice. He made one final call, then came the ritual fidgeting. Adjusting the seat, buckling in, slipping the cigar back between his lips. He turned the key, blew out one last puff of smoke, and pulled away, vanishing around the corner. It couldn't have lasted more than a few seconds, but to Sides and Eckhart, it felt like an eternity. Neither moved. Each waited for the other to go first. They needed to get out of the SUV, cross the street, and climb the fence without being seen. The odds of Weber returning were slim, but after the previous night's chaos, the last thing they wanted was to be spotted by prowlers. They opened the doors cautiously, stepping into the quiet street. The same cool wind hit their faces, just as it had the night before. Gerald Height's whereabouts were still unknown, and neither man had given much thought to how they might track him down. For all his faults, Height had one undeniable talent. When he didn't want to be found, he wasn't. God only knew what his poor parents were up to. Through various contacts, Sides had learned they'd followed their son's advice and chosen not to contact the police. Whether that was wise or foolish remained to be seen. Most likely, Height and his parents were still in communication. Why they hadn't bought a gun, that was the part Sides couldn't wrap his head around. Eckhart was less concerned about Height than he was about the prowlers. Each sedan could have carried 4 men comfortably. 6 if packed tight. 8, maybe even 12, could easily overpower 2 men, even ones as capable as Eckhart and Sides. Still, he knew the odds of an attack in broad daylight were slim to none. No one had been seen near Alfonso's home besides Detective Al Weber, and just the sight of him would have scared off any prowlers. Eckhart wasn't afraid, just alert. Without a word, both men scanned the intersecting streets, searching for any passers-by who might witness their next move. Seeing none, they braced against the fence and vaulted over. Their feet landed nearly in unison. Another quick check, still no onlookers. Then they slipped past the trees toward the back of the house. The air conditioning unit was still lying flat where they'd last seen it. A few dead leaves were caught in the coils, undisturbed. It looked like no one had entered since their previous visit. Sides reached the back door first and pushed it open with a single press of his index finger. He called out once. Silence. Then he stepped into the kitchen and began rummaging through areas he hadn't searched before. Eckhart, always more cautious than Sides, took one last glance around the backyard. He felt like he was slipping into paranoia. A car suddenly raced by on an adjacent road, and he nearly jumped out of his skin. The engine was excessively loud, catching him off guard. It didn't sound like the vehicles the prowlers used, but the rapid acceleration sent his mind straight back to the chaos of the previous night. As the sound faded into the distance, Eckhart reached behind his back, where his belt cinched tightly at his waist. Today was different. Today, his hand met cold iron, the grip of a revolver, 6 loaded cylinders, ready if needed. A sudden thud, and the sound of furniture scraping across the floor drew him in. Eckhart rushed through the back door to find Sides in the living room, standing over the small table that always sat by the front door, now tipped on its side. Sides was yanking drawers out and tapping the bottoms with his knuckles. Pamphlets related to the adherents were scattered across the floor, the same ones they'd examined days earlier. Many were now creased or torn beneath Sides' heavy boots. Eckhart bent down and gathered a few with visible shoe prints, folding them and slipping them into his coat pocket. He looked up just as Sides slammed a drawer back into place and shoved the table upright. "I feel like we've already looked at everything," Sides said. "Maybe those guys from last night came. Maybe they knew where his notes were," Eckhart said. Sides didn't answer. He was already moving through the kitchen, banging open shelves and rifling through cupboards. Eckhart stayed where he was, calm and deliberate. He pulled one of Alfonso's books off the shelf and opened it. A bookmark was tucked inside. That gave him a notion. He'd go through all of Alfonso's books. Ignoring the noise from the kitchen, Eckhart carried the book into the bathroom and picked up another from the stack near the sink. He gave it a shake. A small slip of paper fell out and drifted to the floor. It was from a fortune cookie. It read, "Big changes are coming for you soon." "Big changes, huh?" Eckhart said under his breath. "What was that?" Sides called out from another room. "Nothing," Eckhart said. The banging and rummaging continued somewhere deeper in the house, but Eckhart stayed focused, tuning it out. He picked up a third book and gave it a shake. Only dust fell out. He set it aside and moved to another, then another, repeating the process methodically. Finally, a large, folded piece of paper slipped from one of the books and floated to the floor. Eckhart audibly gasped. Footsteps thundered through the house as Sides came running, thinking his partner had found something significant. Eckhart bent down and unfolded the paper. For a second, his hopes rose. Then he saw it, just another adherence pamphlet, identical to the rest. He held it up for Sides to see. "False alarm," Eckhart said. "Sorry." Sides returned to the rear of the house and both men resumed their respective searches. Minutes passed, no notes surfaced. Then, from the back room, Sides began shouting obscenities. "What is it?" Eckhart called. "More pamphlets!" Sides yelled back. The pounding resumed. Drawers, doors, anything within reach. Eckhart kept shaking books. The two could have gone on like that indefinitely, a loop of frustration and futility, until, suddenly, Sides fell silent. Eckhart reached the final book. He shook it. Nothing. Calmly, he placed it back on the shelf. But the shelf wasn't sturdy. As soon as he let go, the back corner gave way. He stepped back, already bracing. There was a beat of silence. Then the entire shelf collapsed in a loud, splintering crash. "What the hell's going on in there? Brian, are you all right?" Sides called out. "Well, yes, I guess." "Technically, no," Eckhart replied, his voice a little shaky. He could hear Sides hustling through the mess in the back room before finally emerging from the kitchen. He stopped dead at the sight of the wreckage. Only the 4 support posts and the back panel of the shelf remained upright. The shelves, along with the fallen books and scattered pamphlets, lay in a chaotic heap large enough to trip over. Sides stared for a long moment, then burst out laughing. Relieved, Eckhart laughed too. The sound of it grew louder, more unhinged by the second. Sides laughed so hard his knees nearly buckled. He bent over, hands on his thighs, laughing at the floor. They might have gone on like that a while longer, until an unfamiliar sound cut through it. They froze. It was the soft, unmistakable groan of the remaining section of the shelf beginning to give. "Look out!" Sides shouted. "What?" Eckhart asked, but it was too late. The upper section came crashing down. Eckhart raised his arms just in time. The shelf struck his forearms with a heavy thud. He cried out, stumbling backward as the last of the structure collapsed into the pile. Dust exploded into the air. Sides fanned at it blindly while Eckhart backed into the kitchen, cradling his arms. When the dust finally settled, Sides saw something. "Brian," he called, "look at this." "What is it?" "Come see." Taped to the back panel was a manila folder, turned into a makeshift pocket. Tucked inside were a handful of handwritten notes, tightly folded together. There were so many pages that they'd likely caused a slight bulge, just enough to strain the shelf and contribute to the collapse. It didn't matter how it happened. This was exactly what they'd been hoping to find. "Take the whole thing, tape and all," Eckhart said. "We don't want anyone following us to know we found it." "Right." Sides tore the entire pocket from the shelf. Then, thinking ahead, snapped the back panel in two. He tossed the pieces onto the pile and kicked some books and pamphlets on top to hide what they'd found. He handed the folder to Eckhart and moved toward the kitchen. "Let's go," Eckhart said, following close behind. This time, neither of them cared who might be watching. By the time they reached the fence, they were nearly jogging. Eckhart shoved the folder into his coat, vaulted the fence in one smooth motion, and Sides was close behind. They hurried to the SUV. Eckhart unlocked the doors and, as he opened his, tossed the folder to Sides before sliding into the driver's seat. In a single motion, he started the engine, buckled in, and shifted into drive. They didn't wait. As they pulled away, leaving the north side of town for the last time, Sides was already flipping through the contents of the folder.